So for week 4, I'm going to do something different. What I'm going to do is in this week, I'm going to go over the ending code for what you're about to do. And in doing that, my goal is to actually kind of help you pre-learn, but also give you another technique for using AI because it is definitely something that I have found to be really helpful, and it's called a master prompt. But I'll cover that either in a separate small video or I'll cover it in attendance. Maybe I already have. So pay attention, find 2 topics, make sure somebody hasn't already talked. If they have selected it, do some kind of variation. Okay, so here is the ending code for week 4. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set a breakpoint. I'm going to set a breakpoint within the form handler. Okay, now why is that different than setting it up, let's say up here? Okay, that is because I want it to be within the form submission. Okay, and if I set it up higher, then it is only going to give me the process that JavaScript goes through to go through the code to basically do a kind of its version of a compile, if you've ever heard that. But in this case, I want to start here. But it's worth talking about what's coming at us. So for this week, we're going to add a calculator module, and we're going to add a results display module. Okay, and you'll see those as I go through them today. We already last week handled the form, which is awesome. And then so by adding these 2, we'll calculate the actual footprint based on the inputs that we have, and then we will display it. So let me just show it to you so you can kind of see what's coming. So if I hit calculate here, I'm going to go ahead and let this run. And this is good to know too. I can just let this run. What happens is it takes the inputs and it gives me the current entry footprint. So whatever was entered, that's my display results. Okay. So in order to do this, and you also see on the console that there is an object, okay? And if I do another submission, let's say I do more than one person, let's say I do 4, and I do a bigger house size, let's say 2,000 feet. Okay, let's say I do my actual way of eating, which is mostly here, right? And I let that run. Then what you see is you see another entry. And what you see on the console log is actually an array with 2 objects in them, and arrays are 0 indexed, okay? So where is this array set up, and that's why I did it, is up here in the global scope in the app.js, okay? So we're setting a variable for footprint, carbon footprint entries using camel case, and in this case it is a empty array literal. It's a global variable. Okay, so the reason we do global variables, although we do generally over time with coding try to limit them, but in this case it's needed because we need to have access to this data from many places in our code. And we also have these references. We learned about this last time, right, where we say get element by ID, and in this case for the form, okay, and then we get one for the clear button, okay, and then we're into here. I'm trying to remember how much of these. I think most of this except for here, this is the new thing, this array. Okay, so an array is another data structure. So what we're doing is combining a regular array, which you don't have to put objects in. And what do I mean by that? So here you see this 2. Okay, so what this means is there's 2 objects, but the first object in the array. Okay, so there's an array. And that's what you see here. Okay, so you have, and I'll show you in the code where this gets done. You have the outside is the array, and this is the object, and then it has a comma. So that comma is it indicates in the array that we have 2 entries. Now in this case, they happen to be objects, but they could be anything. Arrays don't have to combine with objects. Just for our case, we happen to be doing that, okay? There's other ways, and definitely somebody could look at other ways how do arrays typically get used, okay? So I just want you to know that that's where the form is at. So now let's actually set this breakpoint here. And actually, now that I think about it, we've actually already gone through the get form inputs. That is actually not any different this time around. As far as I remember, there's nothing new here. We're returning that. That's what actually creates that object inside of the array here. And I'll show you in a minute where it actually gets how the array gets updated with that object. So now let's come back over here, and instead of here, let's actually set it here, okay? Because this output is actually created by the console log. Actually, that's the other thing you can find out is you actually can see here, if I click here, is where does that output in your code come from? This is why DevTools is so darn handy. Okay, so now I'm going to set the breakpoint here. I'm going to click calculate, right? This button has got an event listener on it. When I do that, it activates my breakpoint of my code. Okay, so there's a couple things, and I have it pretty big, so I might just try to have this a little more manageable here, right? So I'm going to call calculator, which is a module. Where does that come from? Remember, good review, it comes from up here where we import everything as calculator. Okay, so that's our variable inside of our app.js, our global variable that references that calculator.js. So anything that's been exported will be made available to us here. And then when we're calling it, we call the module and then in this case the function. Okay, so calculate footprint, and then we're passing it that form data. So remember, the form data was created by what came back, right? So when we called form handler, we called the function get inputs, and on the return, okay, so this is what's important. Remember, I was showing you, again, we're looking at when we call this and it does the work of setting up these key values in this object literal, it then returns that, and that's what is stored in our form data. Okay, so now we're going to run a new function that you're going to write this week, okay, which is calculate footprint, and we're going to pass that in. So now I'm going to hit step, and so in here in the function that is in the calculator module, I have passed it in as data. Now when I called it, it was called form data. And now why did I call it something different here even though it is the same thing? Well, there may be other times I want to reuse this, and form data it allows me to abstract that. To say, you know what, I'm just going to call it, and data is kind of shorter than form data. That'd be the other reason. Okay, so now in here, now I'm going to reference what comes in. Now if you're ever wondering, when you're here, you could actually type data down in the console and you could look. Okay, that's right. That's all that information that we saw a minute ago that came back in form data. Okay, that was defined inside of our function, so it's not global, it's scoped just to the function that we have access to here. Okay, and that is the same thing there in the calculator, or that it's passed into this function. So now we're going to say call calculate household points, which is a function inside of this module. We're going to say look at the data. The data is this big object coming in, and look at household members. Okay, so we know it's 4. Okay, household members. So data household members. Now I'm going to pass that right into the function. So when I hit step, so what's it going to do here? It's going to go through some logic that says if household members, this is strictly equal to 1. So remember what strictly versus what is it? Strictly equal versus just equal, I think. So this has to equal data type and value, right? So in this case, if it's equal to 1, then it's going to return. So at this point, as soon as it hits a true, whichever one of these is true, because if this is not true in the logic, then it's going to go to the next block. Now, in this case, we don't use block. We just are using a single expression to say, okay, return the value 14. So now I'm going to step. Now the question would be, could you determine already before you do this line, and this is the way you start to test your knowledge, because, oh, by the way, I should have said this. When we passed in, let me scroll back down. When we passed in, right, this data household members, we pass it in reference on the object we have locally scoped to this function. That's another way to think of it, okay, or to talk about it. And in this case, we've named it something else, okay? What did we name it up in here? We just called it household members, but it is now just that value. So I could come down here if I wanted to, which by the way, you can also use your tools here to actually figure that out as well. Where are those? I think the module. Yeah, so here's all those. Oh yeah, here it is. So local. So I have a household members, right? So I have a local to just this function. Okay. Also call that block scope, but in this case, the question would be, what's it going to do right now? Well, we know that coming in value of household members is 4. So this line is false. So this resolves to false. Okay, so step. All right, so else if it's step. And now we should know, okay, that this is going to be true. So as soon as it does that, it's going to go, okay, now return 8. This is, again, why I harp so hard on DevTools, because it helps you see what the code is doing. So now it now evaluated that whole line. It goes back. Okay, so now it determined based on the logic of that function. By the way, that function is inside of this module. Okay, there's a lot of functions we're going to write this week related to calculator. Okay, so and the more you start to understand this, and by the way, here's your default value. I didn't even talk about that, but if none of these logic blocks or these expressions are true, then it's just going to return 0. So a default value. Okay, so now coming back down here, so now that we have the household, now we're going to go ahead and do size. So I'm going to start stepping a little bit quicker because some of this is redundant. So now we're saying if is apartment. So this is how we're implementing the whole idea of the check. Okay, again, you'll see this in the code along that you're going to do. And is apartment is what we're passing in, right? And so we're passing in this case, the square footage and the checkbox that is either true or false. Now I didn't show these in the call, but you could go back. We could go back. You don't have this code yet, right? So in this case, we could go back here and look at, oh yeah, we're passing data, home square footage, and is apartment. Okay, all right, so we're going to go here, come back over here. Now we could know this is 2000 and this is apartment, so we know which block is going to run. Oh yeah, okay, this one will, because it wasn't over 2000, it was 2000. Now it's returning 7, so we know, okay. So you start to see the pattern here. We're running functions that return values that are the points for the carbon footprint that we'll use later to total them up, okay? So now we come in here. So now we're going to do a switch statement. We've already been introduced, or maybe it's this week. Actually, we get introduced to switch statements when we talk about. So now we're passing in a string, and it's going to, instead of your if, it's actually going to do a switch statement here, and it's going to compare. So in case it's heavy meat, it's going to return this value. So it just shows you, in this case, the switch statement is just much cleaner, right? So the case is like, it says if it's this, then do this. So you can compare it against a traditional else if to see the difference here. And there's cases when it's better to use this, and you can kind of see here when you're doing a string comparison or a simple comparison, it makes sense, and we can still do the return, okay? All right, so now here, now we have that value. So now we have scores, and so we're on our last one. We're just going to pass in that packaging. So again, off the passed in object, we're pulling the key of food packaging, and we're going to pass that into the function. Again, we're doing another switch statement here, right? And we're going to say, okay, now we know it was fresh, okay, based on what I inputted into the form. Okay, so here we go, and now we actually have all the values we need. Okay, our diet type, home size, household member size, and packaging size. So now we determine, now we say, okay, we have a total footprint points is going to just add these up. That's all we're going to do. We're going to do some simple math that takes whatever is in these variables. Again, you can see they're local now based on where we're at in the code, and it's going to add them up. And so now, very much like what we saw in the form handler, we're going to return an object. And now in this object, we're setting a key and a value. Okay, the values have been determined up here. So now we're going to return an object literal. Okay, and we could just step through. We're just going to hit return. It's going to set, and you can see here, look at this, you can see how all these things got set. Okay, step. Now we're back. Okay, so now we've gone from the module calculator into back to the app.js. We now have the results. Okay, so this is that object literal that came back, the key value pairs for each of the points value for what the user gave us in their form submission. Okay, and so now what we're going to do is something you're going to introduce this week, is because we already had form data and we had calculate results. So we have two objects. So we want to actually combine these into one object. And in order to do that, we're going to use an operator called the spread operator. And this spread operator is really great because it's going to take all the key value pairs from form data and all the key value pairs from calculated result, and then it's going to combine them into one object. Okay, but we're also going to add a new key value that is actually going to be the new date and the to ISO. And in here, basically, I have some, you'll learn about this as we do it, is how we actually come up with this string value to represent the exact moment in time that we're at. It's not stored like this. This is just not the way we store data or dates in programming languages. We don't. Okay, so now when I hit step here, I now have a new object that has a lot more content. So it has both of those combined. Okay, so it takes that into there, that spread operator, and it's a quick copy. That's what the content says here, right? And so now we have one object, both of those object literals combined into one, and now we're going to that empty array we were talking about before at the top, the global scope, because this is how we keep track of all of our entries. Okay, so we're going to do a push. So push is a method on an array. Okay, so that array when we started was empty. Okay, when we first, and by the way, if I was to, matter of fact, I could do this right now. I could reload the page, okay? And if I was to come, and matter of fact, I'd have to, now that I'm going to do here, I'd actually move my breakpoint to here. I'd go ahead and do another submission now. Okay, now that I'm here, I have, oh, I actually shouldn't have had it run through that, but that's okay. Let me do it again. Okay, so now that carbon footprint, okay, I can hit tab here. Right, so is an array with one object in it. So on the array, there's a method called push that basically takes that, not basically, it takes that object, that combined new entry from these two that we already had created, and it pushes it into that array. Okay, and now we log it so we can see it. Okay, so now we log it. Okay, console log it. Now we have two of these, right? So we have two entries in the array, which by the way, I could do const new array here and say just an array, but I could put anything in here. So I could say new array, let's see, equals, actually I wouldn't do that. I could do this, is since it's 0 indexed, I could say equals 1. Okay, ooh, can I? Oh, I can't. You know why? Is that why? I'm doing this on the fly. It's always a little bit of a challenge. New array. And this says the 0 index should be, can it equal to 1? Oh yeah, I didn't actually end the line. New array is not, see, that's what you get. So hold on, let me figure that one out. See, sometimes when you're talking and coding, it's not a great combination. So actually, it wasn't that it was let. It's actually the same reason I talked about earlier, because what we're doing is, and this actually I think was part of what you learned this week, is because even though we've set up a const, we're not redefining this variable, we're just updating its value. And in this case, I just went over the method to use, so you know, that's what I get for not practicing. So I could say new array, okay, new array dot push. That's the method, and I could push like a value, right? I could push my name as a value. Okay, cool, right? Now it returns 1, and if I just said new array, okay, what this shows me is that array structure, but I only have one value. But I could also have in here, I could have anything in here. I could have true, right? So now if I looked at that again, I would see I have 2. And if I wanted to reference how do I reference a specific array value, and that's what I was actually trying to do earlier, right? Then I would use this bracket notation in order to say, hey, look in that array and show me that value. So you're being introduced to arrays that are used somewhat in a little more sophisticated way, but at their base, they're just a list of items, okay? And these items can be a mixture of data. Now, objects are different in the fact that we give it a key and a value. And so in our app, we're combining the two together. And that's really helpful to understand that they're different structures, but it is very common in many programming languages to combine them together. A data structure is just this. It's a data structure. It's a list. In Python, we call them a list. Okay. So now we push that. Let's see, where am I at? Where's my code at this point? Do I have to hit? Yeah, I think I have to hit it again. Okay. So now we console logged it. And so now we have our last module. So our last module is that display I showed you before. So in this case, we have a module, right? We've defined its variable value in our global scope as results. And in this case, we're going to have a function that we call, this is display results, and we're going to pass in calculated results. We don't want the entire new entry. We only want the calculated results, so we can just put those on the screen. So now we're going to come over here. We have our exported function. We're passing in. Now we are calling it, we're block scoping this variable to say results, but what we know is it's just calculated results. Okay, so now we're going to set the text content. So here above, what we did, and this is a good pattern to understand, is we did query selector, right, for that entire container in our HTML. If you're not sure where that's at, we could come over here and we could go down here and we could go, okay, here's our section. It's got an ID. So we did get element by ID, okay, on our container. Right, so and the reason we typically don't want to use this a lot is from a like operational perspective. For a large code base, get element by ID costs you a bit. So this is a nice method to use, where we say then we're going to define within there each individual item to say query selector. Now I know this is stuff we've gone over, but you know, it's always good to remind us so that in this module, and if I come back over here, we can see we're going to have in here, oh, here we go, breakdown. Here we go, LIs. So we're going to have some LIs that point to household footprint, household size. Just try. I think we're just not seeing it all. That's all. Oh yeah, household size, footprint. Oh, I think I have it. No, that's right. Oh yeah, household size. That's right, points, home. So we have some built-in, we have LIs in this case, okay? So we have an unordered list, and then we have list items. You'll see this in a minute, okay? So all we're doing here that's the wrong one. All we're doing here is defining in our source the reference of the DOM, okay? So this is then looking in the query selector of the results container that we've defined here to find a specific. So this basically, in a sense, it scopes the DOM elements, and this is a good thing because DOM elements are expensive from an operational standpoint. Okay, so now that we're in here, basically all we're going to do is say, hey, reference that total footprint display, change its text content to this template string, okay, that has what we've passed into it, the total, and we're going to fix it. So if it had a decimal, we're just going to fix it at 0, and we're going to give it some text. So actually what happens here is we keep doing this like for each one, but you don't see anything on the page yet, and I'll show you why. So we're setting the content, we're setting the content for each of these DOM references that are in that result. Okay, we come back here, and now we're actually, because if we looked at this element, it was actually hidden. Okay, this element right now is display none. I don't know if it's probably hard to see that, but it is hidden on the page. So in the step we're about to do here, it's actually going to make it visible. Okay, so we look at the style and we say, hey, display that. Boom. So now here is now when we did this line is when it showed up. So this style display allows us to hide things until we want them to show. And in this case, having all this text content is what is, this is how we created that output here. Okay. So later we can call hide results if we want to. So now we're back here and we're pretty much done. Okay, so that took 25 minutes. I know it's quite a bit, but honestly, I feel like if you get a preview of what we're about to do, my hope is that it will help you. Okay, so now what are you going to do? So you're going to choose two topics, right? Choose two topics. Somebody hasn't already covered them. Use whatever tool you want to research and explain these topics to you. Okay, now I'm going to show you something that I find very helpful because I will have, and I'm going to pull over my Gemini real quick. I will have I have ongoing, matter of fact, I think my oldest session is about 5 months old where I've just continued to have conversations, but I'm going to give you a specific example of one that I had over the summer. I did, actually no, over break, actually I had. And in this case, I don't need to find the session. I do save it, but I had a session where I was I did a water fast for 7 days. And so what I wanted to do was the last thing I said is review this conversation and give me a master prompt I can share with someone else that wants to go through this same protocol. Okay, so what it did is here's your master prompt. Now, master prompt means different things to different people. Okay, you can figure out a good way just to basically say, hey, I want to share this because this is what you're going to share with the class. We don't want to see all your conversation that you're having to understand the things that I've covered. Okay, just to get introduced to them or to have a better understanding of maybe something we've already done. But in this case, it gives you a role. It gives what protocol I followed. Your goal is to help me the critical refeeding process and so this gave me the whole. So I would give this to somebody else, and that's what you're going to do. Okay, so what you're going to do is choose your topics and go research them, and then when you have and give it some time to actually help you understand it, and then when you get your master prompt, right, share that with us, right, and so that's what I'm sharing here. So 80 points comes from your master prompt. Okay, and then you'll reply. So find a classmate that doesn't have a post, try their master prompt out, and see if it helps you understand the topic you research. This is worth 20 points, right? So again, I'm teaching you a new technique, maybe you haven't seen, but also importantly, you're getting a preview for what you're about to do. And often if you get a preview for what you're about to do, it can help you when you get introduced to topics, because the first time you hear something, it can be a bit confusing. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.